Welcome to episode number 172 of CXOTalk. I'm Michael Krigsman, and today we are speaking with Paul Daugherty, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Accenture. And I want to say thank you to Accenture for presenting this show. And I also want to give a special shout out to Livestream because they are our video supplier, infrastructure supplier, and they are fantastic. So we're going to be talking about the intersection of technology, culture, and digital transformation. Paul, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show, Michael.
Hey, it's so great for you to be here. Paul, tell us about Accenture and tell us about your role as Chief Technology Officer.
Yeah, sure. And the topics you mentioned, you talk about tech, culture, and digital transformation, and those are just great topics for that define a lot of what we're doing at Accenture. So it's a great lead and a great set of topics for the day. So Accenture, I assume most people know something about Accenture, but just to give you the real quick story, we're a company of with about $32 billion in annual revenue, approaching somewhere on the order of 390,000 people, moving toward 400,000 people. And our business is really about bringing technology and innovation to businesses and helping businesses achieve their digital transformations by applying the range of services that we have. So that's what we're all about, which is why I think this is such a great topic that you've teed up here, Michael. My role in the company is part of our global management committee, working for our CEO, Pierre Nanterme, leading really, fast Pierre, what my objectives are. It's really to look at where we're positioning Accenture and where we're taking it, a few years from now, to make sure that what we're doing and the services we provide are as relevant and even more relevant with tomorrow's technologies than they are with today's. So to accomplish that as CTO, I have a range of responsibilities, starting with our research and development, our Accenture Technology Labs, and areas like our strategic minority investment program, where we invest in some of the smaller companies that we believe are future leaders. I also responsible for our overall technology alliances and partnerships with all the the companies you'd expect us to be partnering with, as the traditional leading industry leaders we've worked with, as well as the new emerging companies, and also responsible for our emerging technology and businesses, the smaller businesses that we're incubating around new technologies, such as wearable technology, virtual reality, and things like that. So that's what I'm up to.
So, Paul, Accenture is a $31 billion company. You're growing at 10% a year. You are a professional services company, and yet technology is a core part of what you're doing, especially or including advanced technology. So maybe tell us about that intersection.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about Accenture is, what Accenture really exists at the intersection of technology and business. And I think what the DNA of our company is around. Think of it as that double helix of twisting together the technology and business impact, and help and bringing business relevant technology innovation to our clients. So that's really what we're all about. So and technology really runs through our whole business. So if you look at the five businesses of Accenture, we start with Accenture strategy, but our focus on strategy, if you kind of follow Accenture, it's around the intersection of strategy of strategy and technology and business is what we're focused on in strategy. We have a consulting business that's very focused around management and technology consulting and applying these sort of transformations into our businesses with an industry context. We have Accenture Digital, which is all about the digital set of technologies that's transforming business. Accenture Technology itself, which is the delivery of the new and the new technology, as well as all the technology we deploy to customers. Then we have Accenture Operations, where we have kind of the full stack of operations capability, from infrastructure through business process, again powered by technology. So technology really is the common thread that runs through our whole business. And Accenture, being a leader in technology and being ahead in technology, is what allows us to stay ahead in growing market share and growing our business, as you described.
Now, digital transformation, of course, is an important part of what you're engaged with clients, but at the same time, Accenture is part of this digital transformation environment itself. You're subject to what's going on in the world. And so when you think about digital transformation as applied to your own company, to Accenture, what are some of the implications and how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's something we think about a lot because every digital we're in the era of digital transformation. That's the defining change that's happening in business right now, and you see it in every industry in every part of the world. And we recognized this several years ago. In 2013, we came out with a technology vision that talked about the fact that every business is a digital business. And at the time, I remember that being provocative. I'd go into a lot of clients and they'd say, "Nah, we're not a digital business. We manufacture, we do whatever we do." And it was provocative at the time, but it became an accepted idea. And we saw that coming. So starting back then, we started making some changes in our business. So we created Accenture Digital that I talked about a minute ago. We created a different sort of strategy practice, fusing together the digital strategy and the technology with it. Made a number of other changes in our business to position ourselves for the digital, the digital transformation. And that's why if I look at our results, the public results that we talk about, we recently talked about our business. We talked about rotation to digital cloud and cyber and the new technologies. And we announced that 40% of our revenues, so 40% of our business, is in that new set of technology. And that business is growing, well over 20% a year. And so, if you look at that, what you see happening is I think the fact that we've been early in making these transformations to our business has allowed us to do well in the market, gain some market share, bring the right relevant services to our clients as they're in this era of needing a lot of help to make sure we're providing the services. And and that's I think that's what we're all about. And really, this idea of digital transformation and continuing to drive the transformation of our own business, along with being the leader in drive those transformations for our clients, is really what we think about all the time.
So your business has been changing through the adoption of enabling technologies, as well as, I'm assuming, changes to processes, changes to how you relate to your clients. Can you describe the intersection again of the technology as an enabler and the implications for the business and how Accenture people work and how you're organized and so forth?
Yeah, like you said, the technology is an enabler and the catalyst, and we're in this period of amazing technology change, and it's a time of exponential change and growth, which is hard for a lot of us to even comprehend, and we're at the early stages of this. So for all the amazing innovations and gadgets and big business innovations we see every day and every week, it's the early days, and we're going to, over the next 5 and 10 years, see an amazing array of new innovations that are going to transform the landscape for companies. But the challenge is, one of the things we talk about in our vision is there's already too much innovation available for companies. Most companies have far more, you have far more technology at their disposal than they have the ability to digest and deploy the technology. So we talk about this idea of a digital culture shock, where we see many companies stuck, stuck between their legacies, stuck with some cultural changes, stuck with, uncertainty around how to innovate. And that's what we're trying to address: is how do we unlock this, digital culture shock and help clients with really the technology adoption, capabilities, so that they can take advantage of the innovation that's there. And that's where the broader set of services that Accenture has come into play. So we have the strategy group that can work with our clients on understanding digital and what's happening. And if you're in the industrial equipment business, should you become a two-sided B2B platform and change your business model and move away from a product-oriented business model into a platform-based services model? There's big questions like that will shape the futures of companies and shape winners and losers in the future. That's in strategy. Consulting, it's about what you said around process transformation. There's an opportunity in front of us now and in front of every company that we haven't seen since the 90s, to really reshape and re-engineer the way the company does business based on the availability of data and machine learning, machine intelligence, et cetera, wrapped into business processes, and the ability for us to deploy consulting people who understand different industries and business processes and can lead that change through clients and come equipped with the data sets and the tools and the data science to do it is really what's part of that business. Our technology business is about deploying solutions, bringing in to deploy solutions using agile, new techniques, DevOps, continuous integration, delivering in new ways. We call it liquid IT, in addition to the traditional delivery that's important for many types of problems our clients have. And then operations is operating business on a continual basis for clients with digital and our digital services kind of wrapping around all of that. So that's a little bit more on how the business works in addressing your question.
Paul, we have a question from Bilal Zaidi, and I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, and if I haven't, Bilal, I apologize. And Bilal says, well, many companies know that they need to change, but they're unsure what to do. So can you offer advice on companies who recognize these changes, but they're just not sure what to do next?
Yeah, it's a great question, a great point. And the just to prelude to the answer, to back up Bilal's point, we did a survey last year with the World Economic Forum, along with some work we're doing for the forum in digital transformation, and the survey came out with results that said 87%, so roughly 9 out of 10 executives believed that the digital technologies that were coming would disrupt their company within 5 years. So 9 out of 10 saying this is going to disrupt their companies within 5 years, striking high number. Only 7%, less than 1 in 10, said they had the roadmap and understood what to do. And that's just a striking dichotomy that we see with people understanding the nature of the change and disruption, but being uncertain about the roadmaps. I think that data kind of lies at the heart of the question there. And I think we're in an era where that's where a lot of companies are searching for the answers. So in the I think one thing that certainly is not the right way, the thing to do now is the old school way of looking at a long-term strategy forecast and spending a year developing your 5-year strategy. I mean, those days are done. And what we believe the right approach is more of a kind of an agile approach to strategy as well. I mean, it doesn't just apply to systems development. So understanding how to get a more nimble organization and culture in place, how to get more early experimentation in place, develop the kind of guidelines on what you need to do, and then fail fast using kind of the internet mantra. And an old line that we've used for years that still applies in this, or applies even more, I think, today, is this idea of think big about the possibilities and understand where you might take your business. Think about, using my example earlier, the B2B business platforms and big ideas, and start small to experiment and get the experience, and be ready to scale fast where you have the successes. That think big, start small, scale fast is more relevant today than it ever has been.
I spoke this morning with the CIO of a major bank in Europe, and we were talking about this issue, and he made the comment that there is no longer the appetite for these long multi-year transformation. Let's plan out a 3-year transformation project, but they've adopted, as you were saying, an agile approach where now everybody involved is a stakeholder, is a developer, and it shifts IT from the mindset of defaulting to no to actually helping contribute to solve problems.
Yeah, I think that's a great attitude to take, and I think the CIOs who are kind of leading this change, I think, are taking that type of view. I think it's a tremendously challenging time to be a CIO or technology leader in a company, because things are changing so fast. And if you're the CIO, you're responsible for keeping the business going, keeping the lights running, as well as developing the new innovation for the business. And I think those CIOs that are taking on that kind of mindset and looking at how do they become the coach to the rest of the organization in understanding the changes in technology, educating the business, and being at the forefront of the change, are the CIOs who are doing very well in this generation of technology change. I think the CIOs in organizations that are struggling are the ones that are more kind of a little bit more in support mode and a little bit stuck. And it's not that one's good and one's bad. It's just that in this environment, the business is going to move so fast. The needs to move are so the demand for speed is so great that you have to, as I think as a CIO or as a technology leader, I think you have to be in front being part of the change rather than waiting for the change to hit you. So I think taking that kind of approach that you described from the CIO you worked with is the pattern we see in success, and it's something I see it with our CIO Andrew Wilson, who I know you've talked to on your show before. It's a great example of Andrew, in our business, taking a very proactive view and developing a vision on developing the best digital workplace to support Accenture, and then figuring out how to get the rest of the organization there. And that type of mindset, I think, is really important.
Paul, on this subject, sometimes one hears talk of CIOs and IT, in a sense, suffering under digital transformation and the risk of IT becoming essentially a almost commodity supplier of infrastructure services. And yet, on the other side, there's this tremendous opportunity and set of possibilities for CIOs, innovative CIOs, digital CIOs. And so you were talking about this, but can you elaborate on advice that you have for CIOs in order to take advantage of digital transformation and embody the qualities that you were just describing? What can they do? What should they do?
Yeah, a number of things. I think the first thing is around getting on the front foot with it, and the CIO actively participating in the dialogue on the business change and where the business is going and how the technology enables the business change. Now that varies a lot in companies. In some companies, the CIO is in essence the chief digital officer as well, and is the one the organization goes to for that kind of technology insight. In many other organizations, there might be a chief digital officer or somebody else tasked with that kind of role. But regardless of the nature of the organization and degree of responsibility for for technology and digital technology, I think the CIO needs to make sure they have a seat at the table and are carving out that seat at the table to be part of the change and shaping what's happening. So that's the first part of it. A second part of it is what you hinted at with your earlier question from the CIO you talked to, which is making sure that as a CIO you're adapting. You're developing different speeds in the organization. People talk about two-speed IT or multi-speed IT or whatever it might be. And I'm not a big fan of just the two-speed concept, but I think this idea of having a very fast, nimble capability in IT to move at the pace of business is really critical, so that IT can be seen as the enabler and the change agent in that, think big, start small kind of program in addition to scaling fast, which is what IT's always been good about. So I think that developing that different kind of approach and mindset and different skill set around the new technologies is important. And that then leads to a culture and talent issue for a lot of IT organizations. Is if you look at what you've got in the organization across your in-house organization, the partners that you work with, do you have the talent in terms of the insight in the strategic thinking, the skills and the right technologies, the knowledge of the right cloud architectures, big data, digital architectures, et cetera, to take your organization where you need to. And most organizations are recognize they need to go through a talent change as well as a culture change to make sure IT is operating in this new mindset. And then the final, the fourth thing I'd highlight is the need to really think about new architectures, because the new world needs to look a lot different than today's world. So thinking about how you evolve the current architecture. I mean, nobody's got a clean slate and a green field, but how do you take the current architecture you have, appify add the APIs and new approaches to increase and improve the access to the legacy technology, improve the access to all of your technology to other stakeholders, and think about the right way to embed agile architectures and new types of techniques into the technology you're deploying. So those are some of the things I'd highlight, Michael.
We're talking with Paul Daugherty, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Accenture. And if you have questions for Paul, right now there's a tweet chat going on using hashtag CXOTalk. So tweet your questions in and we'll see whether we can get Paul Daugherty to answer them. Paul, you were just talking about culture, and it seems this is a very important piece. And yet you're the Chief Technology Officer. And so historically, we spoke about technology and there was no discussion of culture. Why is culture so important in this mix today?
I was just going to tweet myself a question, but that's a good one. It's important because the most organizations, I'd say Accenture included, need to shift their culture a bit because of the pace of change that's coming from a technology perspective. It's as I said earlier with strategy, the days of top-down dictated multi-year strategy are gone. In the same way, the era of very rigid fixed organization structures are gone, and people need to work differently. The pace of change and innovation is only going to increase. So a leader, the center of the corporation or leadership's ability to drive the change in the organization just isn't going to work. The winning companies aren't going to be able to win if that's what they're trying to do. So understanding how the culture of the company changes to become more innovative and more adaptive as it goes is really essential. That's something we're really focused on at Accenture. We're talking about a lot within our company is an innovation-led culture. Again, our purpose, as we've defined it, is to be the leader in bringing innovation into business. And to do that, that's what we need is an innovative culture and innovative people at every point in our organization who are focused on that. And I think that's not just our company. That's true of many companies. I'd argue most companies in the digital era, because the pace of change is going to be so extreme. You need an organization that can adapt quickly, that accepts change as a new normal rather than as something you just do once in a while, and that embraces and recognizes innovation, understands how to bring that into the business. There's a line that I love called that I heard read a number of times over the years that says culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I believe that's really true. We're in an era where strategy is extremely important. People need to point their companies in new directions. But the thing that's really going to get you, to that strategy is having the culture that's aligned with the purpose, where the people's purpose fits your organization's purpose, and you're moving in the same direction.
Okay, now, so we've spoken about technology, we've spoken about culture and change. Now, would you layer on top of that the role of business model change and business models in digital transformation?
Yeah, this is something that's evolving very, very rapidly. But I think the reality is business models are changing very rapidly in lots of different ways. I talked earlier about platforms and the idea of platforms. We believe that the move toward digital platforms is really a profound shift in the way business works. Business will work in many industries, and you've seen that happen already. So the platform started with Amazon with e-commerce platform, iTunes with the music platform, et cetera. And but if you look at the analyst forecasts, or if we look at what's happening in the industries, we expect dozens, if not hundreds, of different industry platforms to develop. So it's things like GE's Predix platform that they're using, which is their technology, but then it's the businesses the new way they're approaching healthcare around those businesses. We just had an announcement with them yesterday on something we're doing together in healthcare. If you look at what Philips is doing with HealthSuite, their platform for connecting patients, providers, and physicians. If you look at many other cases like that, you see the emergence of platforms which are changing the business model. So for GE, back to them as an example, if you listen to Jeff Immelt and Bill Rue and the GE digital leadership, it's about changing from product to a services model where the services are enabled and delivered through a platform. And the platform, what's important about the platform is it allows you to deliver services from an ecosystem of partners to deliver greater value to your customers. And that kind of change is really what's going to define the future of many industries. You see it happening already in lodging, Airbnb and things like that, moving through many industries. So platforms are a key part of the change. I think the other thing that changes with business models is some of the changes that technology brings into the way you need to think about your own business. Some of this gets into stretching the boundaries on your thinking. But if you look at what's going to happen to the insurance business as you have more autonomous vehicles, as an example, the CEO of Volvo came out recently and said when they introduce their self-driving cars in several years, their autonomous vehicles, they're going to self-insure as a way to get the purchasers and passengers of the self-driving cars more comfortable. So what happens to insurance in that type of world? There's many other impacts where the boundaries between the industries blur and shift a little bit, and it causes you to rethink where your focus is and how you need to compete. We see that happening in many cases.
We have an interesting question from Steve Massey on Twitter. And Steve is saying, that innovation and culture without the right type of underlying vision can lead to chaos. And so how can companies ensure that as this transition, as these changes are taking place, that they're focused, that they're coordinated, that they're going in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that's I completely agree, and you can't have kind of undirected innovation and very distributed culture can lead to it's like an explosion with a lot of collateral damage and a lot of chaos, as Steve says. So I think that's a good point. But that's why all this starts with a vision. A company needs to have a sense of where it's going. I've told you what our vision is, which is different than it was several years ago. But it's the vision that we have to be successful. To be successful in the market as we see it evolving. So I think it starts with that clear vision, so that the organization can get aligned. But then the change to the organization, the culture, and creating more of an innovation mechanism is going to be very important for most companies in dealing with that new new vision that they're setting. So I guess that's how I'd address it. It's a good question. Absolutely right. You need the driving vision to align things, but then you need more flexible mechanism through the company to develop it.
So you mentioned innovation. You've spoken about innovation as one of the important pillars at Accenture. So how do you innovate, and also what is your relationship to startups and smaller organizations who may be developing interesting new technologies?
Yeah, and that's a very, very rich question there. So I'll give you a few perspectives and not make it too long. The way I think about it, so if you think about our business, you said it earlier, 30 some billion in revenue. We have approaching 400,000 people, and 40% of our business is in digital technology. Okay, those sound like interesting numbers, but you look at the other side of that. What does that mean every year? That means every year we have to add 3 billion of revenue, profitable revenue. We don't have the luxury of some startups that can be unprofitable, generate growth unprofitably. So in essence, we have to add 100,000 people every year, which is what we hire every year, with new skills that generate profitable growth equivalent to 3 unicorns of revenue. In technology, generally, that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago. That's defined by this rotation to the new. So that's the way I view the need for innovation in our business. Create a few unicorns a year and add it on in a profitable way to our business as we really transition and continue to grow our workforce. So that's the way we see the business. And to make that happen, we need to have a lot of different innovation mechanisms in our business. And it's also changing our view. I would argue 10 years ago, it was fine to be a fast follower in technology because the cycles move slower. If you're a little late at client server technology or the global ERP wave, you could catch up a few years late and still catch the meat of the curve, the meat of the transition. The technology moves so fast today that if you're not at the forefront with the important technologies, you'll miss a key part of the positioning and growth. Or in our industry, you certainly will. As an example, blockchain 2 years ago wouldn't have been singled out by many people as an important technology for us to focus on. In just 2 years, it's been important for us to have a blockchain practice. We've invested in a couple of blockchain startups to work with them more closely to drive the change. And we've got blockchain R&D going on, and we've got blockchain work going on with clients across different industry groups, not just in financial services, and in many different areas of financial services. That's just in a couple of years, and that's the type of speed with which the technology is moving, and it's moving that fast. Artificial intelligence with many other technologies. So you're back to your questions. How do we make that work? So we have something we call our innovation path, which is how we make innovation work. It starts with research. We have Accenture Research, which generates thought leadership and provocative points of view and such on trends, the game-changing trends, like our technology vision. That's Accenture Research. Then we have Accenture Labs, which is a major R&D investment in 7 labs that we have around the world with researchers and PhDs who are driving hands-on applied research with those trends, in those technologies, that we have the hands-on experience to drive those as they take off. Then we have Accenture Ventures, which is where we invest. We both reach out and work with startups and VCs and entrepreneurs to build that innovation network through an open innovation approach that we run. And then we take investments in companies where we believe we can create kind of a special relationship and create a good way to grow their business and our business together going forward. And then we have something we call Accenture Studios, which is where we bring our clients to ideate and co-innovate together in an environment that combines everything from design thinking through experiential hands-on technology to new development techniques like extreme programming and agile development and such. You can quickly ideate and build solutions, and then we scale that into our global delivery network and all the businesses of Accenture. So we're investing increasingly in that. If you look at our business, we're again 30 billion in revenue. We invest about 3 billion a year in improving our capability. About 10% of our revenue. It's about 1 billion in internal investment, about 1 billion in acquisitions, and about 1 billion in people in training. And that's for a company of our size in our industry. That's a lot of investment to make. But we believe that's what's required to keep moving the organization at pace. And I can come back around to this, but just to round out one point, I mentioned acquisitions. We've acquired over 40 companies in the last 36 months, and that bringing in that new capability to accelerate this kind of rotation is a key part of the strategy as well.
From an innovation standpoint, one thing that I find is quite interesting at Accenture, recently I spoke with Mary Hamilton, who works at Accenture Labs, and she was talking about things such as virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D printing, workforce crowdsourcing, a whole bunch of new technologies and new ideas. But as she was talking about it, it wasn't just abstract pie in the sky. It was always connected to very specific use cases with enterprise ROI. And so maybe can you describe the linkage between when you're thinking about innovation and the connection to ROI and use cases, maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's what gets us really excited. You can get anybody at Accenture excited when you talk about combination of innovation and business value. And that's exactly the way we look at it. Even starting with in that innovation path, even starting at the research stage, we're looking at what's the potential. So when we started working with drones a number of years ago, it was what are the applications, and we started working with oil and gas companies around pipeline inspections using drones. We just deployed an application using drones for a very, very large agricultural producer in Asia to use drones to dramatically improve their agricultural productivity, et cetera. So that we're looking for those combinations of the technology and the use case. With virtual reality, great example. One of the really exciting things that we did there in the last year was work with a manufacturer to apply augmented reality to manufacturing settings. So an assembly worker using augmented reality with laser guided precision and machine intelligence, machine learning built into the software could operate at a far more skilled level using augmented technology and make that person a better worker, a safer worker, a more productive worker, better quality products, a win-win-win for the worker, and for the company. And those kind of scenarios are what get us excited. And when we, and it goes across many domains. So we're working, doing a lot of work now on artificial intelligence, which we believe is going to be, probably define the next big wave of innovation around digital and what's happening in artificial intelligence. We believe is going to have a massive impact, and maybe one of the biggest impacts that we've seen in how we work among all the technologies to date. And that's why we're working early with technologies like IPsoft's Amelia that we announced a relationship earlier this week, and we announced the creation of a Amelia practice to take the deep learning, cognitive learning agent Amelia and apply it into business scenarios. So we one of the things we did this week at the Sapphire conference, where I think you might have been, Michael, is we demoed Amelia using SAP and learning how to use SAP to perform business processes and transactions in a very compelling way, and thereby either offload or augment the work that people were doing. And so that's an example of tying directly to the value there. So we're obsessed with this idea of looking at the technology and then saying, okay, how can we generate some return with that technology?
So obviously you're not focused on pure R&D. Your focus is on the application of new technologies to business in order to provide some specific, measurable, concrete value to that business.
I'd say that's true, but we're pushing. One of the directions we're pushing is we're pushing and stretching out the boundary of our R&D a little further, and the line is blurring between pure research and applied research. The example I'd give you is we're doing work in quantum computing right now. We're not doing quantum computing hardware, but we're very, very interested in quantum computing software. And we submitted one of our first quantum computing problems to be solved recently. And why would we be doing that? I mean, we would have looked at it a few years ago and said, why wouldn't Accenture be doing that? The reason is that we believe there's a high probability that there's a narrow range of problems that will be solved in a very compelling way in the very short term using quantum computing, and thereby we want to be the leader in bringing that technology to our clients. So we need to get a little bit earlier on the innovation and research funnel than we normally would. So your point is generally true, although with the pace at which technology is moving, every technology coming into business quicker, we need to push a little bit more into research. And the phrase I use is the latency between innovation and market impact is shrinking like it's never shrunk before. And that means that that if you don't have the ability to sense and pick up on these early stage innovations, as I said earlier, the fast follower isn't good enough in many cases. You may miss the opportunity.
And so what does this mean for managers of established companies? And sometimes we hear the phrase legacy companies. It's not a very nice phrase. What does this mean for established businesses who are running an existing business, have an existing model, and yet it's not enough to be a fast follower? What are the implications for them?
Yeah, it's something we spend a lot of time on, and it's a hard question. It's a really tough question, because everybody's got, people have a business to run. If you're a public company, you have shareholders, you have quarterly earnings. You need to move the business along as you invent the new business. So there's a lot of pressures along the way. I was with the top leadership of a Fortune 100 company this week, talked about this very issue, and the kind of dialogue we had is I think the way you need to think about it, which is, what are the assets that you have? I mean, every company's got great assets, and I wouldn't call them legacy companies. That they're the incumbent leading companies of today. And the question is, what assets are going to hold you back and may become the boat anchors, and what assets are going to be assets that you leverage into the new world? And when you look at our technology vision and the things we talk about that are important in the digital world, you talk about things like these platform economies, which involve building these complex ecosystems. If you look at the idea of digital trust, which is the trust you engender with your customers. If you look at this idea of intelligent automation and really understanding deeply how business processes and people work and how information flows, a lot of the incumbent companies are very good at a lot of those things, in addition to having scale, supply chains, value chains, customer relationships, et cetera. And I think the art of this is to look at how do you take the right assets you have and look at how to repurpose those in the digital context moving forward and create that future, and not do it too fast. If you do that too fast, you kill the old business and lose the ability to invest in the new. If you do it too slow, you get overtaken. So I think that issue of balance and pace is right. And don't look at necessarily changing the whole business. It's what are the key things you need to get right to be successful in transition to business.
We hear a lot about startups like Uber and Airbnb, although I wonder at some point when a startup is valued at so many billions of dollars, at what point is it no longer a startup and it's a global company?
When you're valued at 80 billion, then.
But so we hear that these companies are the ones to emulate, but for established companies, as you said, with scale, with very successful products, with supply chains and so forth, you can't just magically turn a switch and become an Uber.
Yeah. No, you can't, and that's why. The other mistake I think some companies make is trying to be an Uber. I'm a big believer in the Sun Tzu art of war, which is don't take your enemy, don't hit your enemy on the front lines. Figure out how do you attack from a different angle and do something different. And I think I have too many discussions where we get called in by the senior leadership of an organization. They say, tell me how I can be the next Amazon or whatever it might be, or the next Uber, or the next Airbnb, or the next Google. And the problem is the question is wrong. You don't want to be the next. You might want to emulate their success. You might want to emulate their speed. You might want to emulate their culture. But what's the right strategy for your organization that will be successful in an environment where you have companies like that and more unicorns coming all the time that will be successful, and look at it in that way. So again, I think it comes back to, in that case, kind of a strategy issue of you need the attributes of these leading digital companies. And I think every organization does need to develop those attributes because that will be a prerequisite to success. But it's not emulating their strategy. It's coming up with the strategy that fits the market position and the assets that the companies bring to the table.
So having a clear sense of what their own strengths, their own assets are, but that also implies they have a clear sense of their own trajectory. And isn't that the hard part going into the future, knowing what to do?
Yeah, well, I think that you need there's no easy cookbook or answer to it, but you need to look at what's going to be good and differentiating and valuable going forward, and what's not, what's going to go away and not be differentiating. If you believe blockchain is going to be an architecture which kind of transforms the way a lot of transactions works and eliminates intermediary organizations in a lot of cases, which I believe it will. Then if you're dependent on those or have a part of your business dependent on that, then you need to rethink the business model, make sure that you either embrace and become a leader in deploying the blockchain enabled architecture, or you move away from that and identify a different way to provide value in the marketplace. And so I think you need, it's all about, I think, looking at what you can't do or don't want to do, and what's threatened and what you can do, and then navigating the course as best you can, and again revisiting it continuously because the environment's changing fast.
Paul, we only have about a few minutes left, but we haven't spoken much about changes in talent and workforce capabilities, and what are the implications on workforce when digital transformation starts to take hold inside a company?
Yeah, that's a massive topic, and I think it's really interesting. Something we think about a lot with the number of employees we have. We really believe and are convinced that this liquid workforce idea is the right way to build a workforce in the future. And the liquid workforce looks much different than today's workforce in many ways. One of the things that we did recently that attracted a lot of attention is our CEO and our Chief Human Resources Officer, Ellen Shook, announced the elimination of annual performance reviews in the traditional fashion and a move to something called performance achievement, because we believe people need to be coached and managed to be successful in a very different way in the digital economy than they were in the industrial economy. And so we're moving away from the old way of doing things to a new way of doing things that I think is critical. So that's one example. I think that the constitution of the workforce is different. The surveys would tell you that in the US, up to 50% of the workforce will be contingent and contract labor within a few years. What that means is that the people you want, the expertise you want, may not work for you as employees. They may not want to work for you as employees. So understanding how to use models like crowdsourcing or cloud talent models may be critical to you. And I'd argue for most companies, there's going to be something you do where you're going to need that kind of different crowd capability going forward. For us, we're looking at that in many ways. We look at processes like testing. We test the testing business where you test big systems for clients. That's going to be automated. That's going to be crowdsourced. That's going to look very differently in a very short period of time, which is why we're doing a lot of work around crowdsourced innovation and how we leverage that and develop that within our business. So this different way of managing employees, different mechanisms like to take advantage of how you get skill in the marketplace, like cloud and crowd models, are critical. And then I think the other thing that's key with the millennial and Gen Z populations that are coming in to the workforce very rapidly is providing a digital workplace that allows them to excel. And if what I hear time and time again from employees, a lot of companies, is they come in, their employees come in and are frustrated that their technology at work, is so awful compared to the technology they use in their personal lives. And we need to close that gap as technology leaders to make sure that people have the best technology to enable for the digital generation coming into the workplace. We're allowing them to be as effective as possible. And those organizations that have the infrastructure and digital workplace allow that to happen are going to have an advantage going forward.
Well, I've just been informed that CXOTalk is trending number 46 in the US. So thank you everybody for watching. We have just a minute or two left. And so Paul Daugherty, you're the CTO of Accenture, one of the largest professional services companies in the world, one of the largest companies in the world. When you think about digital transformation, what is the distilled essence of your advice that you can boil down to offer to people who are listening, who are facing this very difficult, challenging transition environment?
Yeah, I'd end on three things, boil it down to three messages. The first is learn. We're in an era where if you're not learning every day, I think you're gonna find yourself in a tough spot. So as individuals and as leaders, we need to learn every day. I wake up every morning and first thing I look at is what happened last night, what happened overnight, what new tech innovation, new announcement is happening, because it's moving that fast, and we need to figure out how to continually reinvent ourselves. So learning is the first thing. Second thing is imagination. Think we got to think differently. Just because something didn't work yesterday doesn't mean it won't work tomorrow, because we have new ways of doing things. The imagination becomes more important as an attribute in individuals and in organizations. And then the third thing I'd say is a phrase I've been using that I heard a little while ago that I like, called hack the future. We could all hack the future and make the future, bring the future to the present in very different ways. The technology is very accessible. You can go out there hands-on. Anybody can go out and be an Amazon Turk or innovate using technology, and understanding how you can hack the future, bring the future to the present is within our grasp, and something we all need to think about.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We have been talking with Paul Daugherty, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Accenture, and you have been watching episode number 172 of CXOTalk.